My name is Martin Hale. I'm 62 years old. For 35 years, I worked in a world few people truly understand, directional sound design for defense and strategic operations systems. What I created wasn't music or ordinary film audio. I created sensations. I programmed panic. I calibrated human instinctual responses using sequences of frequencies. I never saw the battlefield myself, but the soldiers who used my systems survived because of them. Once, an army officer called just to thank me for a simulated structural collapse, a sound that made enemy troops flee a base that night. I didn't respond, just sat in silence. Because those same sounds once kept me up at night. In 2020, I officially retired. My wife Lena and I moved to a small residential community on the southern plateau of Utah, known as Skyline Vista. The locals called it the place where wind goes to sleep. We bought a timber cabin at the top of a hill, surrounded by pine trees and lavender fields. The house had a wide porch facing west, where the sun would set like a fireball falling into the valley. For Lena, who had endured 10 years of degenerative joint disease and 3 knee replacements, Skyline Vista was a miracle. "We'll live here for the rest of our lives," she said. "And I'll never have to hear another car horn again." Skyline Vista was a gated community with around 70 homes scattered along winding hills. Most residents were retirees or families with vacation homes. The HOA regulations were fairly simple, focused on preserving nature and maintaining architectural harmony. No high-rise buildings, no concrete fences, no floodlights to wash out the stars. I read every single page of the HOA documents before buying our home. Every clause. There was nothing to worry about. I spent the first year building a small studio in the basement. Not to work, but to play. I restored reel-to-reel tape machines from the 1970s, tested shotgun microphones in mountain wind conditions, and occasionally created nature-themed soundscapes used in promotional videos by national parks. Lena built a Japanese-style herb garden. She placed each stone by hand, designed a drip irrigation system, and even built a small greenhouse to grow autumn maples. Life was nearly perfect. In the evenings, we sat on rattan chairs under the porch, listening to the breeze and sipping oolong tea. Everything started to change in the summer of our second year, when a white SUV parked in front of house number 14 on the southern hill. A woman stepped out, business dress, designer sunglasses, and an energy that didn't belong here. Her name was Karen Devlin. Claire was under 45. Rumor had it she was a former communications director for a luxury resort chain in Las Vegas who chose early retirement after internal legal troubles. She bought house number 14 in cash, threw a welcome party with organic wine and live jazz, and within 3 months was elected HOA president. At first, I didn't care. Claire installed new mailboxes for every home, commissioned a local artist to paint a vintage-style map of Skyline Vista, and organized weekend tea hours for residents to mingle. I didn't attend, but she seemed active, maybe even competent. But then one day, while trimming grass in the backyard, I noticed small wooden stakes along the western tree line behind my house, marked with orange tape. Some had numbers. I called the HOA. The assistant said, "You'll need to speak directly with Mrs. Claire." Her voice hesitated. 3 days later, Claire called back. Her tone was bright, like someone selling timeshares at a resort. "Ayo, Mr. Hale. Just a minor zoning plan, nothing to worry about. We're doing a preliminary survey for a winter amenities upgrade." "What project?" I asked. Something very special, Skyline Vista's first gondola line. We have a chance to become a premier winter destination, with cabins running from the entrance gate to Vista Crest Peak. It'll increase property value for everyone. I gripped the phone. And where exactly will that gondola run? We're still adjusting, but it's likely to go over the airspace behind your house. But don't worry. It'll be 25 to 30 feet above the roof, won't touch anything. What gives you the right to use the airspace above my home? Claire chuckled. A Clause 14C in last year's bylaw amendment permits community utility use of overhead space. We sent out notice letters in April. No one in the neighborhood received that letter. Perhaps it got lost. But everything's been approved by the board. You really should attend meetings more often. I hung up, heart pounding. For the first time in 2 years, Skyline Vista no longer felt like paradise. And that was only the beginning. Part 2, The Sound of Wrath. 3 days after that phone call, heavy trucks began arriving. On their beds were gray-painted steel columns, coiled cables like metal serpents, and large wooden crates containing mechanical equipment. The drilling, the clanking of metal, echoed through the valley like an assault on the peace Skyline Vista once had. I called my lawyer, David Klein, a land dispute expert I had worked with once during a film project in California. He came out, reviewed every document, map, and HOA regulation. After 3 tense hours in the living room, David looked up, eyes heavy. Eclairs created a legal gray zone. Clause 14C was added in the last annual update. It doesn't mention gondolas specifically, but the language is broad enough that the court might interpret it in the HOA's favor. And don't forget, they did send out a notice letter, even if we never received it. Fake letter, I said. Or it never existed. David shrugged. It's hard to prove that in court. But we can still try. I'll file for an emergency injunction to halt construction. We submitted the paperwork that same week. But less than 48 hours later, it was denied by a local judge, one with close ties to the county board where Claire's brother worked. The ruling read, "No evidence of irreparable harm, as the structure does not physically touch Mr. Hale's land." I felt like I was dreaming. I, a law-abiding citizen, a regular taxpayer, someone who chose Skyline Vista for its peace, was being treated like the troublemaker. Meanwhile, Claire Devlin was hailed as the reformer. When the first towers were erected, Lena stopped leaving her room. Panic didn't hit her like a storm, it crept in like fog. She began losing sleep, then refused to eat. I spent many nights sitting beside her, listening to the distant rumble of construction, feeling like someone was digging a grave for our life. I tried everything else, filed complaints, organized resident meetings, contacted local newspapers. But it was as if Claire controlled the very air around here. The only article that ran was a short blurb on a personal blog calling the gondola a promising development. TV stations didn't reply. One editor told me, "HOA stories just don't get clicks." I realized I was isolated. Not because everyone agreed with Claire, but because they were afraid. One neighbor, Tom, a retired judge, whispered to me, "She's connected. Brother on the planning board, husband's a shareholder in the construction company. Don't confront her head-on." But if I didn't confront her head-on, then what could I do? I'm Martin Hale. I once made enemies flee using sounds they couldn't see. I created fear out of thin air. And if the law couldn't protect me, then I would protect myself. I started with a notebook. I documented every sound the gondola made, rotation hums, cable tension, cabin sway. Then I compared them to sound effects I once designed for the military. Then I pulled out old gear from my studio days, shotgun microphones, a 64-channel mixer, parabolic directional speakers, subsonic emitters once used to simulate micro-earthquakes. I built a small system around the backyard, hidden inside artificial rocks, wooden bird statues, even beneath planter boxes. Each device was programmed to emit sound at a 45-degree angle, 30 feet off the ground, exactly the gondola's height. From the ground, you'd hear nothing. But if you were riding a cabin over my house? You'd hear everything, cables screeching like they were overstretched. The slow creak of metal tearing. The faint echo of something coming loose. And most importantly, low-frequency pulses below the human hearing threshold, triggering rapid heartbeat, clammy hands, and an overwhelming sense of losing control. I didn't call it sabotage. I called it acoustic resistance. Lena looked at me the first time I tested the system. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. I nodded. I can't let them take everything from us. If the law won't protect us, then sound will. Part 3, The Nightmarish Ride. The gondola's grand opening was held with great fanfare on a bright, sunny Saturday morning. Claire hired a country band, set up a buffet with pastries and orange juice for residents, and even invited a local travel journalist to take photos. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was live-streamed on the HOA's social media. Everyone dressed up, smiled, and raised their phones to capture the moment Skyline Vista entered a new era. I stood on my balcony wrapped in a thick coat, holding a cup of hot coffee. Lena sat behind the glass, her eyes hollow. I activated the system in standby mode. I didn't plan to ruin the event. But they needed to understand. The first gondola cabin glided over our roof at 9:17 a.m. Nothing happened. Cabin 2, cabin 3 still calm. But when the sixth cabin, carrying a family of 4, approached, I triggered level 1. The hiss began softly, like a metal snake slithering across the roof. Then came the faint sound of metal stress fractures, just enough to make the listener uneasy. Inside the cabin, the father tilted his head. The young daughter pulled her hand away from the railing. The mother frowned. By the 10th cabin, I upgraded to level 2. The cable strain became more distinct, followed by a click, click, like locking pins slipping out of place. A middle-aged woman gripped her partner's hand in panic. A young man looked around the cabin, face tense. On the gondola's third loop over my house, I activated level 3. At 10:05, a retired structural engineer named Philip Montgomery, 68, riding in cabin 14, requested an emergency stop after hearing a sounds resembling snapped bolts and a deep structural rumble. The gondola stopped. 27 people were left suspended midair. Some cried. Some called 911. Children clung to their parents while elderly passengers turned pale. Claire stormed out from the event area. She barked into a walkie-talkie, pointing at the cabins. Moments later, 3 operators began deploying the rescue lines. The evacuation took more than 2 hours. After every cabin was brought down, the technical team ran diagnostics. No mechanical issues. No broken cables. No abnormal vibrations. No faulty components. A quick report was sent to residents, normal operations, no danger detected. But fear had already taken root. The next day, gondola usage dropped by 60%. Those who still rode it looked around nervously as the cabin approached the stretch over my house. I only needed to run level 2 occasionally. The unease built day by day? A teenage girl posted a TikTok video of her panicking in the cabin. It reached 300,000 views. A travel blog labeled Skyline Vista as the scariest gondola in Utah. Claire called an emergency meeting. In a video, she said, "We are facing a smear campaign from an unknown source." But no one believed it. People began whispering. One resident said, "I swear the cabin shook when it passed over Hale's house." Another added, "Maybe it's just the terrain. But something feels off." In the second week, the HOA hired independent sound experts. They brought ultrasensitive microphones, oscillation sensors, and frequency recorders. They mounted the equipment to the cabins, monitoring the entire route. Conclusion? Nothing unusual. But on the third day, a cabin carrying 2 freelance journalists experienced light shaking. They reported hearing a howling noise like wind piercing through metal gaps. One of them wrote, "It felt like riding a machine about to break down, even though everything looked strangely safe." Claire lost her temper. She marched to my front door with a squad of HOA board members, demanding an inspection. I welcomed them in. They found nothing. Every speaker was disguised as garden lamps or decorative sculptures. The control unit was hidden in a code-locked wall panel. Claire hissed, "You're sabotaging this community's reputation." I smiled. "I'm just sitting in my home. If something's wrong, why haven't your engineers found it?" A week later, Claire proposed an additional HOA fee to fund more technical inspections and patrols around the gondola. The resident meeting turned into a battlefield. Tom, the retired judge, stood in the middle of the hall. "We've spent over $200,000 in just 5 weeks on a project that's losing customers, losing trust, and tearing this community apart. I call for a vote of no confidence in Chairwoman Claire Devlin." The vote was held immediately after. Claire was removed. Tom was elected interim chairman. But it didn't stop there. Tom, along with a group of residents, requested a full independent audit of the HOA's financial records. The findings shocked the entire community. The gondola contract was awarded to Claire's husband's company without a bidding process. Claire's brother was the project supervisor and approved the plans without board review. The environmental report was fabricated. The county management office officially intervened. The gondola project was suspended indefinitely. Claire left Skyline Vista in the middle of the night. Lena stood beside me on the balcony the day the gondola shut down. She squeezed my hand and softly said, "You gave the sky back to me." I said nothing. I just reached over to the sound system switch. For the first time in months, I shut it off completely. Part 4: Restoring the Sky. The following month marked a quiet recovery for Skyline Vista after the storm. The gondola was suspended while an independent team of engineers was hired to conduct a full evaluation. Their conclusion: the system was technically safe, but installing it so close to residential homes was a major design and social failure. Tom began holding open weekly meetings, inviting all residents to contribute ideas. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. Those who had once remained silent now stood with courage. They shared their fears, their sense of powerlessness, and their deep desire to restore the peace that had once defined Skyline Vista. A community referendum was held. 81% of residents agreed the gondola must be relocated outside the residential zone. The newly proposed route would wind along the northern ridge, longer, more expensive, but it didn't intrude on anyone's home. Tom invited me to speak at one of the pivotal meetings to share experience in confronting violations of personal space. I stepped up to the podium, for the first time since I had moved in. "I'm not proud of everything I did," I began, my voice low but firm. "But I don't regret it. When the law fails to protect a person's basic right, the right to live in peace, then that person must speak up. Whether by traditional means or creative ones." The room fell silent. Then applause erupted. After the meeting, Tom came over and shook my hand. "Martin, would you consider joining the resident advisory group? We need someone who understands the value of limits." I smiled. As long as it's not during sunshine hours. I've got a garden to keep up with Lena." 3 months later, the dismantling of the gondola began. The cabins were taken down, cables rolled up, and steel towers cut into sections. The once noisy control station, more like a military outpost than a neighborhood amenity, was converted into a cozy community center where kids painted and neighbors sipped tea. The newly rerouted gondola line was completed just in time for the following winter. It wound along snowy hillsides, sparkling in the sunlight like a silver ribbon. Tourists loved the views, and Skyline Vista residents knew it was the symbol of a compromise done right. Claire Devlin never returned. But her name was still mentioned occasionally, as a reminder of how dangerous unchecked power can be. Behind my house, beneath a large decorative stone, one directional speaker still remains, the final piece of my sound system I hadn't removed. I never use it anymore. But I haven't thrown it away either. One afternoon, as Lena trimmed lavender and I adjusted the radio antenna, she turned and asked, "Do you remember that time?" "Every detail," I replied. Not because of fear, but because I've never felt more certain of when it was right to stand up. She nodded. And the sky is still blue." I looked up, and for the first time in many years, I saw a sky with truly nothing above it. Because Skyline Vista was no longer a place where gondolas loomed over people's homes. It had become a place where people learned to rise and reclaim the sky.